I have to warn you that the first hour of the programme at least won't be an easy listen today. And I wonder whether that is part of the answer to the question that I will eventually get around to asking you. And this is heavy stuff as well. I exchanged a few words with Nick on the way out of the studio, and these are the conversations that obviously we are duty bound to have. We have to have. But my goodness me, they are so unpleasant, aren't they? So horrible. They involve things. In fact, I imagine when I tell you that we will be discussing the sentencing of Huw Edwards, the disgraced former BBC presenter, for the first hour of the programme today, you may well flip over. And I understand that, but I know that you understand that we have to talk about it, and you should really stay. You should really listen, because part of that temptation is part of the problem. Part of that temptation to turn away from the unbearable, from the unthinkable, is perhaps the reason why we only really contemplate it properly, consider it properly when we're presented with the downfall of a famous person. We don't look at I think, probably just shy of 5,000 prosecutions every year related to child abuse images. How often do they even appear in the media when it's not a famous person in the doc? Spoiler alert, they generally don't. And the fact that we don't like talking about it, I'm going to tell you something before 10:15 today that it makes me almost, physically balk at the thought, but I have to tell you because it haunts me, and it speaks directly to the problem that we're trying to address, that we have to try to address today, which is why the criminal justice system on this issue, more perhaps than any other, lags so far behind public sentiment. It's not the job of the criminal justice system to reflect public sentiment. It's pretty hard to pin down precisely what public sentiment is. And neither has Huw Edwards been afforded any special treatment, or, to use that hideous phrase that some very bad actors are trying to plump up and inflate at the moment, two-tier justice. It's just not true. There was very little chance of him being sent to jail, as I understood it, not least because the person who had sent him the images for which he has been convicted was not sent to jail themselves. So it seemed unlikely that the sender would be punished less stringently than the recipient. But I don't know why we have such a strange attitude, or why our criminal justice system has such a confusing attitude to this subject. And I won't be using the phrase, I say I won't be using the phrase child pornography. I may accidentally use it, because again, I think that perhaps is part of the problem. So problem number one is we don't like to talk about it, and what grows in the shadows, what grows in the darkness, the really bad stuff flourishes, right, in the darkness. So the less we talk about it, the less light we shine on it, the more, I would never use the word complicit in this context, but the more likely we are to unwittingly, unwantedly, and accidentally contribute to these problems. So the language as well, I won't use the word child pornography, because that sounds like the infant equivalent of adult pornography, as if it is somehow a process of consenting human beings doing things for cameras in the hope of arousing or titillating other human beings. It is not that, not least and most obviously because there is no consent. There is no consent at all. And that is where the thing I'm not sure I should remind you of comes in. My memory is so frightened of this that I can't completely remember where it came from. I think it was a journalist who shadowed the police department responsible for tracking this stuff, who wrote about what she, and I'm pretty sure it was a she, had seen as they found themselves trawling through the hard disks and similar of suspects. And there's a phrase that she wrote in a national newspaper that every time, and I don't think about it often, but every single time this topic comes up, and it is for reasons we'll explore together this morning, it is only when somebody famous is convicted of these kind of crimes that we have these conversations. I think that's probably an inevitable upshot of the kind of society that we live in, the nature of celebrity, the nature of news. I don't think that there is much alternative to that. But so I sit there, I start reading it, I feel a bit sick. And then I remember this line that was written by a female journalist charged with reporting on the officers, the police. This is going back a few years. I wonder whether they're as well funded or as well resourced as they were then, who are charged with tracking down the victims. They look in the footage for recognisable objects, even a barcode or something, I think, on a box that contained electronic goods, or a tiny glimpse of a view in the reflection of a computer screen or a window or a television, and the forensic work that goes into this kind of thing is something that I think, under my glorious rule, we'd be directing a hell of a lot more manpower and resources towards. But I'm going to say the sentence, right, that speaks to the very heart of why I don't get the attitude that this country has to this crime. I don't understand why Huw Edwards and the person that sent him the images have not been sent to jail, because their appetites fuel that abuse that people undertake in the knowledge that it will provide some form of hit or pleasure to people who view it. And the phrase involved a little girl being, this is a massive trigger alert, by the way, if this kind of thing has happened to you, I need to warn you right now, it's a very banal sentence, but it's possibly the most heartbreaking string of words I've ever heard in my life. And you can hear the little girl on the film that this journalist wrote about saying, "Do all little girls do this with their daddy?" And he films this stuff, and there's a market for it. And my understanding is it's not necessarily monetized. Sometimes it will just be swapping images of your abuse for somebody else's. And that is what child sex abuse images are. That is what that hideous phrase that I'm only going to use once more to highlight its hideousness. That is what child pornography supposedly is. And I don't get it. I'm sorry. I wish I didn't say that as often as I do sometimes. I've got another topic later today where I'm going to admit to you that I'm a little bit confused about how to handle it. And it's a lot more light-hearted than this one, I can tell you. But I don't really get it. I can tell you that, and the figures that we found date back to 2020. I couldn't get my hands on anything more recent, but I imagine it's a fairly constant graph. Well, maybe not actually, with COVID and the impact upon the criminal justice system and the mess in our courts and the prioritisation that officers and prosecutors have to undertake. But there were 4,762 prosecutions relating to child abuse images across England and Wales in 2020, and of those, 2,385 ended in a conviction, which is about half. It's just over half. That's a conviction. 8 out of 10 people caught with images of children being sexually abused do not go to jail. That is a statistic, a revelation from the head of the National Crime Agency, which itself, we read recently, is hemorrhaging staff and supremely under-resourced. So this is 4 years ago. 8 out of 10 people in the UK caught with images of children being sexually abused avoid going to jail. So we can say two things immediately. Yeah, I know. I'm reading some of your messages in response to that line, and I wondered if I'd get it out. I don't know that. I think I've said it to you once before. I just think that if anybody's thinking, I don't know if I can do this, or I don't know why we have to talk about this, I just think that reminds you why. I think that reminds you why, that single line, why this idea that the images are somehow detached from the abuse, the idea that there's several degrees of separation from the abuse and the trade in images. I reject that violently. I reject that with every fibre of my being. You watch this stuff, you create the market. You feed that appetite, you create the market that these criminals, these subhumans feed. So I want to just say why. I don't know, I never know at 13 minutes past 10 in the morning who's listening or who's qualified or who can comment. I imagine that if you have endured the nightmare of going through cases like this, having been adjacent to them, obviously, if you have been convicted of these kind of crimes and you think that you can help the rest of us answer the questions we're about to ask, I do want to talk to you. But who can answer it? Who can actually answer the question of why? Why is a crime that makes us want to cry and howl and hang Huw Edwards by his bootstraps from the nearest lamppost, metaphorically speaking? Why is this crime in this country so leniently punished? And it always is. So let's park immediately any attempts to claim that there has been special treatment here, or that there is any form of preferential justice, or to use that dreadful phrase, two-tier justice. Just not true. It's a conversation about a national characteristic. It's a conversation about a facet of our criminal justice system. And I am not embarrassed to tell you that I have no clue why. Is it because if they jailed these people, then we would run out of jail space even quicker than we are already as a consequence of 14 years of austerity and Conservative Party policies that were designed to appease the vampiric chompings of Daily Mail editors rather than actual national interests? I don't know. Oddly, the numbers are almost symmetrical. If the 2,500 or so convictions were all translated into prison sentences, then the prison population would crash through the 100,000 barrier, which is sort of critical mass. We're nibbling around the edges of it at the moment, but there is absolutely no way they could accommodate another 2,500 prisoners tomorrow in the prison system. But why don't we send these people to jail? 0345 6060 973. If I have to come up with another question because I don't have enough people listening to this program with enough insights or experiences to answer that question, then I'll do that. But why don't we send these people to jail? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I don't say this to you very often either, but don't forget that this microphone in front of me works both ways. And some mornings I need you to do me a service in the way that you're sometimes kind enough to explain that I do use. I listen. Sometimes I need you to hold my hand when we have certain types of conversation. I can't do this one on my own. Why don't we send people like Huw Edwards, whatever the mitigation and whatever the defence, and people like the young man that sent him these images, why don't we send them to jail? 0345 6060 973.